now.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for your patience. I'm sorry, we're a little bit late getting underway this evening. I'm a little scrambled. I'm just coming out of another open house on the Civic Hospital proposal. So I think most of you know me. I'm Jeff Leeper. I'm the city councilor for the neighborhood. This is an open house to take a look at a second proposal or resubmission by Uniform for the property at 335 Roosevelt. Obviously, they made an original proposal that I expect most of you saw. There was a lot of feedback from residents, from me, from the city to the proponent. They have now come back with a admittedly much reduced proposal, although there are some other changes as well. So tonight is our opportunity to take a look at that proposal, ask a few questions, and then I'm looking forward to getting your feedback, as well as the city planners getting your feedback over the next few weeks. So with that, I don't know, am I turning it over to Jacob or to Barry? Jacob. So I'll just turn it quickly over to Jacob, since I think most of us already know the drill. Oh, I'm sorry, Jacob, before we start, Steph, are there any housekeeping items that you wanted to run through?
Yeah, just to let everybody know, we'll be disabling the chat shortly, just to sort of keep things a little more streamlined into the Q&A. So any questions you'd like to ask to the applicants or the planner, put them in the Q&A, and everyone will be able to see them there, and then they'll be able to answer your question either here or, we can type it. And just to let you know that this is being recorded. We'll be posting it on the Kitchissippi Ward YouTube shortly after this. I'll be sending it to the community associations and the planner and the applicant, and you'll be able to find it if you look up Kitchissippi Ward 335 Roosevelt resubmission on YouTube. Should be up by the end of the week if you'd like to get it. If you don't see it before then, feel free to email us at jeff.leeper or my very long last name that I'll put in the email after.
And sorry, Steph, I see that Steve Goche, who is the city planner on the file, who is the one who's going to be responsible for making a recommendation to committee and council as to whether or not to approve the new submission, is here. And I would just suggest that we might want to make him a panelist in case there are process questions that he can answer.
Yeah,
thanks.
Just promoted him. So there we go. Hopefully we've got everybody now. So I'll turn it over to whoever would like to start the presentation.
Great, thanks, Steph. I would like to share my screen. I do have a brief presentation, but I need host permission.
Should be good now.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Jacob Olduke. I'm a senior planner with Foten Planning and Design. I'm joined tonight by one of our partners, Brian Casagrande. I'm also joined by Hoban Architecture, that's Real Labelle and Barry Hoban. And also joining us will be Uniform, who are the property owners. We have John, Dan, and Emily available from their team to answer any questions as well. So I would like to begin by walking you briefly through a quick timeline. The first community meeting that we had was way back in August 2019, where we had presented some initial concepts. About a year later, we went to the city to speak with staff through a formal pre-application consultation meeting. Soon thereafter, we completed our initial submission for an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. I'll walk through those in a quick minute. The first public meeting was in September 2020. I'm sure some of you were there, and it's good to see you again. We did complete our first resubmission in December 2020. It's at that point that after receiving some further comments from staff and the councillor and the community associations, that we decided to take a look at a major overhaul to the project, an overall redesign that was completed in the spring and summer 2021. And around September and October, we came back to the councillor and the community associations, and provided a brief community update. It was in that meeting that it was requested that we hold another public open house. And so this is that meeting, public meeting number 2, as a result of this proposed development. I'll walk you briefly through some of the changes that were made, but there is going to be a subsequent presentation after myself from Hoban Architecture that will run you through more of the design philosophy and considerations. I'm going to try to focus on the planning applications themselves. So this is a view looking southeast from the LRT station that shows the difference between the original proposal on the left and the new proposal on the right. The former proposal had a building height of 21 and 18 stories. The revised proposal is two equally heighted buildings of 12 and 12 stories. And again, Hoban Architecture will go over this in more detail, but we previously employed more of a podium tower type design where you had a strong ground oriented podium of about 3 to 4 stories, followed by a tower above that, again, reaching 18 and 21 stories. The revised design is more akin to what we would call a bar building, which is a shorter squatter type building that is significantly less taller than the previous proposal. We include further step backs at the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th stories in order to create sort of a cascading effect with respect to the upper stories. From a side profile elevation perspective, you can see that it's a significant reduction in building height from the previous taller building, which was 21 stories, to now two very similar, not exactly identical, but very similar buildings of 12 stories. As part of the redesign of the building, it did come with a change to certain key statistics as part of the application. An increase in the footprint of about 12% as a reduction of the overall building height, as I mentioned, from a podium tower design to more of a bar building design. The buildings get a little bit squatter, and it's an increase of about 12%. And that also means an increase in lot coverage of about 5%. Overall, the buildings are significantly less tall, but also less dense and have a significantly reduced gross floor area of about 9.5%. And overall density is significantly fewer units, a reduction of about 20% for a total of 284. We are still planning 2 levels of underground parking as part of this proposal, but at this time, these are the revised site plan in front of you. Walking quickly through some of the perspectives. Once again, this is an aerial view looking northwest across the site. Again, former proposal on the left, new proposal on the right. You'll also notice a change to some of the ground oriented buildings. So along Willmont and Winston and on the back on Roosevelt as well. We do have these, what we're calling, inspired by the 613 flats model. They're essentially 3-story, 6-unit, low-rise residential development. One of those buildings was removed as a part of the proposed redesign, but 3 of the buildings will remain. This is another perspective on Winston, looking north, showing the aforementioned low-rise buildings that were discussed, as well as the revised eastern building. This is another perspective showing the aerial view of the mid-block connection, providing access through the site connections to the MUP as well as the residential community to the south. To speak to the purpose of the applications, just as a recap, and I'll walk through this quickly, but the official plan amendment is to amend Schedule C2 of the secondary plan, which permits a maximum building height of 8 stories, whereas the subject proposal is for 12 stories. Subsequently, the zoning bylaw amendment seeks to change the zoning on the site from R3 and R5B to a straight R5B zone with a site-specific exception. This would essentially increase the maximum building height as proposed to 37 meters, corresponding with the 12-story proposed building height. And there are other site-specific standards that will be identified through an urban exception code, such as certain reduced yard setbacks. The third application in line would be a site plan control application. There is no existing site plan control application that is forthcoming. So there's no site plan control application at this time, but there will be a future application should this set of applications proceed and receive approval. To speak briefly with respect to the policy context, a lot of the comments that we received were what has changed since the previous application that was submitted in 2011 and eventually settled by the Ontario Municipal Board. So we have this slide that shows that the previous application actually would have been submitted under the 2005 PPS context. And it's a little bit different. These sections and policies do change and get updated every 5 years. But you can see that there's been a change in the frequency of key terms such as transit intensification. You're seeing certain policies be updated to promote more intensification next to transit stations. This is just an overall summary of sort of that change from 2005 to 2014 to the newest PPS from 2020, which is the PPS that applies to this prospective development. With respect to the official plan, this application was submitted in 2020 under the current official plan, but we did want to walk through briefly some of the changes as part of the 2021 council approved document from October. So overall, we're seeing a direction towards more intensification and a diversity of housing options in neighborhoods and other communities, but there's also policies specifically under section 631 that speak to allowing higher densities and permitted heights adjacent to rapid transit stations. So similar to the current context where we argue that the current proposal supports transit supportive development and transit oriented development adjacent to Kitchissippi Transit Station, under the new official plan, it's a similar policy context, and it actually provides a little bit of a different direction. So once again, this is a council approved document going to the ministry, but we did get some questions as well about the state of this application with respect to the current and council approved versions of the official plan. So we wanted to provide a brief overview with that respect. I'm now going to turn it over to Rael Labelle from Hoban Architecture, who is going to provide us with a brief design presentation as well as a short video.
Thanks, Jacob. If I could be made host, I'm going to share my screen as well.
You just went.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So my presentation is going to appear lengthy. There's going to be a number of pages, but I'm going to be brief on each one of these slides, just to kind of give everyone an overarching sort of idea of what has changed with this concept and how it relates to our obviously our residential context to the south, as well as overall articulation of the building. So as Jacob mentioned before, we are moving from an 18 and 21 story building to a 12-story building that has significant architectural language that allows it to transition down to the lower neighborhood, all the while keeping some reference to a sort of a benchmark framework that was established by the OMB. So the next slide looks at an OMB approved massing of 8 floors at the very top, that spans essentially from the westernmost setback to the easternmost setback requirements of the site. Our proposed scheme looks at taking away the center portion of the site, extending Willmont through the site, as well as shortening the overall footprints of these buildings so that we have a gap between the existing 7-story building to the east, as well as significant building step backs that step the building height down from its uppermost 12-story down towards the public realm that exists along the gap that we're going to create along Willmont, as well as the existing street on Roosevelt to the west. So the idea is to redeploy that massing that we're removing from the center of the site and the eastern portion of the site, and actually position it over on the top with some architectural detailing that allows this mass to recede as you extend up. And this basically is intended to provide access to the sky plane, as well as bringing porosity to the site for surrounding neighborhoods. So this is another slide that basically looks at that stepping. Again, everything, on the right, there's the bar building that is essentially 8 stories. A continuous bar with a pass-through that would be 2 floors along Willmont to allow pedestrians to connect through, versus what we're proposing over to the left, which looks at creating stepping starting at 7 floors, 9 floors, and 11 floors, all the way towards the gap at the center of the site, and then restarting again 7, 9, and 11. So really preserving or reducing as much of the mass of the building as possible and creating openness surrounding the site. Some of the site development strategies, I'm going to look at 7 points, and I'm going to go through these in detail, and then we can revisit them in the question period. Essentially, these help to shape the design of the entire site. I mentioned before, we've got now two 12-story buildings, the east and west, and everything to the south of the development is a low-rise wood frame component that helps to transition the development to the existing low-rise neighborhood. The ground plane is predominantly occupied by 70% open space consisting of landscape. So that creates a really interesting interface between the existing neighborhood and the development, as well as what we've done is pull the vehicles off of the street into the site for loading, garbage pickup, and move in, move out, so that these vehicles, these larger vehicles, are not seen from the residential streets. Our residential lobbies are actually located strategically, one on Roosevelt and the other as part of the extension of Winston. And so this allows the buildings to have very prominent entrance features, as well as you can see the blue pedestrian lines cutting through the site are essentially, this entire development is predominantly pedestrian oriented versus vehicular oriented. There are parking ramps that take you down on Roosevelt at the bottom left. There's a parking ramp access there that takes the car off the street to underground parking. And there's another parking ramp on Willmont, which tucks underneath one of the low-rise buildings and again removes the cars from the street. This project is going to encourage visitor parking and is going to have a large capacity of visitor parking so that there are no cars or a reduced amount of cars within the existing neighborhood, and also pulling all of the cars from surface to below grade. This is just, again, another 3D animated slide that describes what I've just talked about, with the emphasis on the entrances to the residential buildings, which are highlighted in the pink color. Next slide basically looks at that connection on Winston through the site, and pedestrian focused through the site with a bit of a public art feature at the very end at the crossroads between the MUP and that pedestrian connections. You can see in the yellow arrows where we've identified the loading access points. So again, removing the trucks from the street. Our residential access point for the east building is located at the very heart of the site, again, promoting that diversity of public and private connection. The landscape public open space, looking at it from the north, extends through the site. At the very bottom of the page, you can see the connection of the crossroads between the MUP and Winston Avenue, the pedestrian link cutting through there. We've animated this space with a small, low-rise sort of residential lobby, which just projects out and starts to shape your pedestrian experience as you come through, but predominantly dominated by landscape and trees. Which brings me to the next slide, landscape open space. This is an image taken from the northern part of the site along the MUP. You can see the articulation of the building, how it's broken down in terms of materiality, setting up a 3-story datum line that creates your foreground experience as a pedestrian. And that entire ground plane is animated with amenity spaces, which will be active throughout the year. Main entrance on Winston. This is a view looking north on Winston, and you can see at the very end the public art feature, the street trees that can extend through the site, as well as a small low-rise pop-up residential lobby that punches through. What's really important and valuable here is to start to see how the red brick stepping of the building starts to sort of rise up, and also the sky plane, which is completely visible from the residential neighborhood to the south. This is another view as you get up a little closer towards Willmont and Winston. And so you can see how the low-rise residential component along Willmont starts to extend and relate to the existing residential neighborhood to the east, while creating a significant step back of the buildings to the north. And then again, you can see the main entrance component, which still has a presence through the gap of the site. There's a shot of main entrance on Roosevelt, looking, again, this is the northwest corner of the site. We've got the pedestrian bridge leading to the LRT in the foreground on the left. And we have our residential lobby, which is located to the right. And you can start to see the significant step, the setback between the building and the neighboring residential property to the south. This is another view from that same, just a little further on Roosevelt, and standing in front between this empty lot where we removed the low-rise component. We have a parking ramp access here, as well as some outdoor amenity space. Again, a significant setback between the existing residential neighborhood and the building. And again, all the while emphasizing the breakdown of the mass of the high-rise rising up from 7, 9, and 11 floors with a significant building step back at the very top. This is a view down on Willmont, again, looking west in this case, standing in front of what will be the transition piece between the existing residential neighborhood and the new proposed low-rise buildings. Again, an extension of building height throughout the street, allowing that to be the shaper of this development, and the high-rise buildings sort of falling away in the background. This is another slide that speaks to streetscape on Winston, looking north. This is just again about the diversity of housing type, and again creating a strong datum line along those residential streets that relates to the height and scale of that neighborhood. The diversity of housing form in this case is intended to attract larger family-oriented unit types to be focused within this housing typology, and perhaps providing a more affordable rate because of its wood frame construction type. And again, this is the transit-oriented development view. So to the right, we have the LRT, the new Dominion station location, proximity to the bridge, the pedestrian bridge that will link and connect you to the MUP that will span east-west along the front northern part of this development. So just to go into some of the massing principles and how we've looked at articulating the architecture and making sure that we are responding to this being a very sort of delicate approach to design as it relates to building transition, height and transition for its existing residential neighborhood. So I'll go over these 6 points in detail. This basically is intended to show a diagrammatic breakdown of the mass. This looks at scale and height transition with regards to the low-rise podium that sets up Willmont and Winston, and creates that building step back for the high-rise component that's set in behind to the north, that's also articulated with a 3-story podium edge, as well as a red brick or a darker brick mass that steps up from the public realm with 7 stories, and again 9 and 11, in order with significant building step back and roof terraces that allows this building to really to help break down the mass. This slide here looks at the view from Winston looking north through the gap, emphasizing the sky plane to start with a 22.5 meter building separation that allows pedestrians and the residential neighborhood to connect to that MUP and essentially connect to the LRT. The low rise, again, I can't emphasize enough the low rise component, how important it is for the street in order to set up that street experience and create a really attractive 7, 9, and 11 story stepping that frames this 12-story building. This is a slide that speaks to the building setbacks and some of the landscape interfaces, especially when we get into the neighborhood just north of Willmont. We've got the building footprint itself steps away from the rear lot lines in order to achieve a 10-meter building setback for the high-rise component in behind the existing residential buildings. We were originally in meeting with Steve Gauthier and planning staff we have compromised from an old building step back, which was at level 7, bottom right-hand corner, to a new building step back at level 4, which achieves that 10-meter building step back for the high-rise component. The site porosity I spoke about, this is a slide that just, again, emphasizes the footprint, the stepping of the footprint to provide more of a landscape interface, as well as really, emphasizing the amount of space that exists in the center of the site for the street easement to connect through and to be animated by. It's a great opportunity to create a bit of a crossroad feature with a public art. So a public art piece that we hope to continue to explore as this project progresses. Again, the emphasis on these, the stepped building heights down from Roosevelt up to 7, 9, 11, coming back down at Winston with another relationship to 7, 9, and 11 again. So really dramatically reducing the length of these buildings, breaking that bar building down into 2 separate components with a really strong sort of public realm and a larger gap at the center of the site. Again, this is just another slide to help illustrate the very sort of aggressive articulation of the building footprint itself, but also, the stepping happens at grade with the footprint as well as above as the building steps up in height. So it's a very dynamic overall piece of architecture. This here looks at the, actually, no, that's it. I'll just go to the video now, and we can and then jump to the question period. So again, that foreground, that's your pedestrian experience along the MUP. The public realm at the center of the site, the public art piece, the residential podium, the drop-off loop for vehicles to come in and out and down into the parking garage, keeping the cars off of. So thank you very much. And now to questions.
Steph, if I may, would it be possible to make Dan Tomka and John McDougall co-hosts, or sorry, panelists, just in case there's any questions for the owners?
Yes, Dan Tomka and who else? Sorry.
John McDougall.
Yeah. Both of you should have been promoted. So we'll go into the Q&A, and just to kind of reiterate, we'd ask everyone to put their comments and questions into the Q&A box on the bottom of the Zoom application. So far, we've got one question, but we'll take all the time we need to let questions come through and answer them. So to go to the first question that we have from Lindsay Gaisier, who was just tuning in, and they ask, am I correct in saying that all vehicle entrants will be coming from Willmont? What is the logic for this? If someone would like to answer Lindsay's question.
Yep, I'm happy to jump in on that. I can provide, I can share my screen, but Rael might have a better version of it. But on the site plan, you can see there is a parking ramp on the Willmont side. But the main parking ramp is actually located to the west over on Roosevelt. So 2 parking accesses for the common underground parking garage. I think it's safe to say the main ramp is on Roosevelt as it leads to a signalized intersection to the south. But there's a secondary ramp on Willmont as well. So 2 ramps.
Okay. Perfect. There's a couple other questions coming in too about the ramp on Willmont. So just to kind of not deviate from those, Sue Morris also says, the ramp on Willmont seems to be new. Please confirm that this is for the 2 levels of parking. If we.
Yeah, that's a secondary ramp for the existing planned 2-story parking garage. Okay,
perfect. And maybe to also cover it, why Emma Thom also asks, why can we not have the cars from the Scott direction this is a better solution than coming down a residential street. Maybe if you'd like to talk a bit about the rationale for the ramps.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it. We did originally explore an option for continuation of Scott Street as the main vehicular entrance to the property. We explored it with obviously our project team as well as with staff. And it was determined that due to the location of the multi-use pathway and other elements, that extension of Scott Street through a private driveway or I suppose an easement would not work for multiple reasons. And so we had to seek a secondary plan, or another option, which included an access on Roosevelt. And as part of this plan, there's an additional ramp on Willmont.
Okay. Just in case anyone does want to, send follow-up questions, we're happy to take those as well. Moving on to the next question from Virginia Miller, who asks, why does an 8-story building have to be continuous? Why can't there be 2 8-story buildings that are equally aesthetically pleasing as a 12-story model? If any one of you would like to tackle that.
I'm happy to jump in here. Essentially, what we're looking for here, the client was very deliberate about, there's an amount of density that we're having to put on here, and we're not adding density. We're looking at redistributing density from an 8-story building to a higher profile building in order to provide greater open space. That is essentially the answer to our proposal today. The 8-story building simply as a bar building from our perspective is not the correct answer to this development, and that this site deserves more open space, and that there's a way to architecturally respond to that with what we've proposed in terms of stepping and creating a diversity of building typologies on the overall site in order to really create a comfortable pedestrian environment that allows our building height to be transitioned down to the neighborhood that is different than what a flat 8-story building would be. The reality is that an 8-story profile building would result in a lot less open space, and this is what we prefer, is a 12-story building that steps and creates and really celebrates open space for this neighborhood. And we think that the site allows for these building transitions to occur quite well.
Well, if I may, though, fundamentally, I appreciate Virginia's question. 2 8-story buildings could be accomplished on this site. There's no physical impediment to building 2 attractive 8-story buildings, but that wouldn't meet with the financial performance that you're looking for.
Correct.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thank you as well. To move on to the next question that I'm seeing, if perhaps maybe Steve would like to answer this or help answer this, since it's a bit of a city policy question. David Mowbray asks, how much additional revenue would OC Transpo realize from going to 12 stories from 8 per year? Policy talks about higher density and height, but I have yet to see numbers. If anyone would like to speak a bit on that subject.
Well, I do not have those numbers. Can't really answer the question. I could research it.
I can't provide a numerical response. I don't have OC Transpo's data, but I can say that the idea behind the higher density and the height is to, as a lot of, as transit-oriented development, as a philosophy, is to put more people adjacent to transit stations and support them in our quest essentially for more multimodal transportation. So at this location, you've got everything, right? You've got a transit station right there, a brand new LRT station. You're also going to have a multi-use pathway to the north that connects to the larger cycling network and multimodal transportation network in the city. You can walk down to Richmond, you can walk everywhere, and you can also choose your personal vehicle. So I can't answer the direct question with respect to OC Transpo, but I can say that the additional stories or the density redistribution and the overall intensification of this property or the proposed development leads to more people being located adjacent to transit and a multi-use pathway. So it provides options for people.
Jake, may I just ask, are the new documents online yet? Is the resubmission up on the DevApp site?
Yes.
A few days ago, yeah.
It is, okay. So there is an up-to-date transportation impact assessment then, or what they call a TIA on DevApps?
No, what has been published is the site plan and the renderings and elevation, the architectural material.
Okay, is there going to be a new TIA? Because the density has changed somewhat.
Yeah, so there will need to be a revised TIA.
Okay. So David, there's a document called the Transportation Impact Assessment, I think, or what we all just call a TIA. And it has assumptions in there about what the mode splits are going to be, how people are going to get around. And it's not necessarily the developer or planning department's responsibility to reverse engineer that math. But I think it would be a fairly simple desktop exercise to figure out based on the modal shares, what they are anticipating, and translate that into farebox revenue and play around with some of that. I'd be interested in helping out with that as an academic exercise if you're interested.
I'd be happy to help take that and pass it on as well, David, if you'd like to email our office after. To move on to the next question from Sabina Vasilov. So 3 questions. Will the proximate location to the LRT result in a significant diminishment in parking spots? And I'll put the other questions after.
I can answer that briefly. We are proposing a market rate amount of parking spaces. It's less than a 1-to-1. These are issues that are going to be further refined at site plan stage when we have a full building design. But at this time, we are over the minimum and under the maximum as it applies to sites within proximity to rapid transit stations.
Okay, and to kind of take on the second part of their question as well, what percentage of the units are 1, 2, and 3 bedroom? And will any percentage of units be deeply affordable?
I don't
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Rael.
It's still early days, and obviously the unit mix at this point isn't fixed. There's going to be clients are going to do their ongoing market studies to understand what the market demands are. But essentially, at the moment, as we are advertising the total units, we're looking at a 65% percentage to 35% 1 bedroom. So 65 2 and 3 bedrooms to 35 1 bedroom. And with approximately 11% of those being in the larger suite types. The low-rise buildings are also being considered for larger suites to accommodate families and ground-oriented units. So those are all things that are currently being considered.
Okay, and just to sort of tackle the next question as well, will there be any social or affordable housing units available to accommodate a growing need for affordable housing in the city? If you'd like to speak perhaps a bit more on that process as well.
Yeah, there's no formal affordable housing as defined in several different ways as part of this proposed development. But what we are saying is that the proposal does contribute to an overall housing stock in the city, which does contribute to housing affordability. And the project also includes various dwelling types. Rael touched a little bit on the 2 and 3 bedroom or the family sized units, and with a smaller amount of one bedroom apartments. Specific to the low rise building blocks, they would be they could be achieved through wood frame construction and other cheaper construction techniques that may make the units more cost efficient. And it would depend at the end of the day on the market analysis, but I can confirm that there is no planned formal affordable housing units as part of this development.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Sorry, can I jump in there?
Yes,
Just quickly
you'd
with a
like
follow-up question. I have lost track. Is this development, if it passes, going to generate Section 37 benefits? See Steve getting ready to turn his mic on.
Well, so far, the increase hasn't demonstrated a Section 37 increase, no.
Okay, no worries. That plays into the answers, so perfect. Thank you, I appreciate that. Sorry to interrupt.
all good. And to move on to the next question that we're seeing in the Q&A from Mary Willmont, who says, I'm glad to see there's a public pathway extending from Winston to the MUP. There's always been a public pathway until Fendor sold the property, but the glass structure makes it appear private, constricts and narrows the pathway. Is the glass structure necessary?
I think, yes, it is necessary. We feel as though what we've done is, if you look at the site plan that's on your screen here on the right, this is, I think this one is slightly out of date. What we did is, if you want to zoom into the center there, you can see the drop-off loop. We've actually scaled back that one-story building to align with so we scaled it back approximately 2.5 meters. And it now aligns with the property line, which is the street easement to the left of Block C, so that there is a clear extension of the street through the site as it relates to that easement. So a great question. I mean, I think it's a little bit more obvious in the visuals that I had demonstrated. I'm happy to, if there's any further questions regarding that, I can bring those up on the screen.
Just to add to Real's response to its ground floor amenity space for the residents, there is a principle called all eyes on the street that we use in planning, and adjacent to walkways or any public open spaces like this, it's always a good idea to have active type uses right there. So whether this is a I don't know, a gym or any other type of amenity that could be used by the residents of the building with glass windows, it does allow a certain amount of interactivity between the residents and those using those spaces and pedestrians crossing the space. And it just makes it safer for everybody passing through, that there's people around and people doing things. So it's a CPTED principle that we sometimes apply, crime prevention through environmental design, that we use sometimes in planning. So it does have a function as well.
Mario,
just to add, just going to add one more thing is it's good that in this case here, it's a very good question, because, this idea of crossing the threshold and feeling like this may not be public space. Well, that's another reason why the ground level is animated with over 80% of amenity space and not private units, because it allows this to feel active and very much like I would say a traditional main street where you have shops and boutiques. So it is animated, as Jacob pointed out, with amenity space. So,
Maria, I'll just say I agree entirely with you, and I have raised this with the developer as well, that I would prefer to see that impediment to sort of the free view through the space. I've asked them to try to remove it, and I will continue to lobby Steve to push back at the developer and then council. So I don't consider it settled at this point.
Perhaps to sort of jump off on the point that you made, Rail, I'm going to jump to a question from Emma Tom, who asks, will there be any commercial units at the ground level, or is it being looked into at this point?
No commercial units. Amenity space is the predominant use at this point at the ground level.
Okay, and
It's mainly to serve the building and not, public amenity. It's really just private amenity spaces.
Awesome. Thank you. To go to the next question from Robert Husson. They ask, the original density was at 194 in the previous proposal, and now it is 285. Any explanation why the increase?
I'm happy to answer that. I don't believe the original density was 194. I'd be happy if you send me an email to look at those numbers and identify where that comes from. But as you can see by the numbers on the screen, the original proposal was for 361 units across all of the buildings on site. And that has been reduced by 21% to 284 units. So if there's a discrepancy there, or if you have materials that show any other answer, I'd be happy to work through that with you by email.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacob. And for those of you who might want to contact our office at the end, or applicants, we'll put everyone's emails in the chat at the very end so that information is available for everyone who's currently attending and who might be watching this. And to move on to the next question from Kathleen Bryden, which I think Jeff will answer. Which says the OP was just approved on October 27th, 2021, with a clear cap on the site at 8 stories, which aligns with the O1B decision of February 2014. Why are we proposing to open this up less than a month later via OPA? How is this respecting democratic process?
It's an interesting question. I will just say the OP has not yet passed. We expect it will sometime in the first quarter of 2022 when the minister signs off, or not. There could be a lot of back and forth between the city and the minister, and I know there'll be a lot of lobbying on the minister to change the official plan, but that new official plan is not yet passed. But I will point out anytime, and I think the developer did it in this evening's meeting, where they talk about here's what the new official plan is going to allow. Any development is looked at under the rules that are in place at the time for which they apply for it. So I think they call it the bishop's principle in law. So the new official plan is a largely irrelevant document with respect to what can and can't be approved here. This will have to be approved or not under the existing official plan. Steve, did I screw that up?
You're muted, Steve.
Sorry. No, the application was submitted, as you've mentioned, under the current official plan. There will be a new official plan. This application will keep on being reviewed. The report will obviously discuss the previous official plan and the new official plan, and any changes to it would be incorporated to the new OP.
Jeff, it's Brian here. If I can just add from what I understand, and Steve and Jacob can correct me if I'm wrong, but our review of the new OP policies as adopted by council are such that they haven't dramatically changed, and the principles are the same as they were under the old. So, even though we're effectively potentially amending a new official plan by the time it finally gets through the minister as a result of this, the principles haven't really changed as they relate to the application. And your reference to the principle, Jeff, is close. It's the clergy principle.
Clergy principle. I'm sorry, the bishop principle.
And it's not related to anything religious. It's actually the name of a person that had a relevant hearing that the board ruled on many years ago.
Yeah. So in the case. And I absolutely, that's all fair comment, Brian. If anything, the new official plan will probably make it easier to put in big developments near transit to the applicant's point. But this application is going to be viewed for approval's sake through the lens of the existing official plan, which will be in place for several months more.
Thanks, Councillor. Just to add a little bit, we did include it in our presentation because we have received a lot of comments about how this relates to the new official plan. We didn't want to come back with a simple answer, simply saying, the new OP doesn't matter and it's only the old OP, which through the clergy principle in this discussion, I think we kind of know how that works. The idea was just, again, in response to feedback received saying, the city's worked very hard on this new OP. You have this proposal in the door. Could you please speak to it a little? So that's why we included it, but we do understand that the old OP is still in place. Thanks.
On the same page. Perfect.
Awesome. And to take the next question from Sabina Besserloff, who asks, what traffic studies have been conducted to determine effect of traffic on Roosevelt onto Richmond as well as Willmont? I know we spoke about the TIA before, but if anyone can maybe speak to some of that information now, that might be useful.
Yep, I can speak to the TIA process. So it's a longer process. It takes several stages. The transportation impact assessment is actually one of the first studies that gets started when you're preparing a proposal for a development such as this. You submit a screening form, and then there's a follow-up study, a step 3, and finally a step 4 is when this project is, or when the project is actually deemed complete. So there are several stages and several steps that our transportation consultant and their counterpart of the city in the transportation department go through, basically, from very broad discussions early on to a more detailed discussion about how the location of the parking garage is going to impact, the accesses to the parking garage are going to impact adjacent signalized and unsignalized intersections. So that report is available online. I would encourage anyone interested in the transportation impacts to go read it. We'll have a discussion with staff about a potential update to that TIA. Our general understanding on projects like this was when there is an overall reduction in gross floor area and density, that the conclusions of the report don't change significantly, if at all. We'll consult with our transportation consultant and confirm this to be true, but that's my understanding in general when it comes to reductions in size for new development.
Fantastic. So to move on to the next question that we have from Kathleen Bryden, who says the OMB decision of February 2014 directs the city to amend the bylaw for the site to permit lot coverage of a maximum of 60%. What is the overall lot coverage being proposed in this resubmission?
As shown on the site plan below, we currently have a lot coverage of 49%.
And if there are any follow-up questions to that as well, and the same goes for all other questions, feel free to keep them coming in the Q&A. And Kathleen also sent another question that asks, to build on the question of Mary Wellman of the WVCA, it is important to note that the W Streets residents have had public access through the site since at least 1939, according to a longtime resident of Whitby. This is the first time in living memory that what may well be a legal right-of-way has been obstructed, prevents us from connecting to our neighbors across the way. We are one community. We take that as feedback as well, but if anyone would like to comment or give any more information on that right-of-way, feel free.
I will just say this has been a discussion for a number of years, and I've looked into it with the city's legal teams. This is entirely privately owned property, and the city has no easements over any of it. So there is no right-of-way that exists there. But we are all insisting, I think, that the developer honor their commitment to maintain access through the middle of the site to connect the Roosevelt Bridge. It's just not backed up by a formal agreement that exists anywhere.
Thanks, Jeff.
I'm sorry, other than the OMB decision, I think enshrined that as well, didn't it? That there must be that right-of-way, or sorry, not right-of-way, that there must be that passage.
I
I
can't
think
say
so.
for
I'll
sure.
leave it there. Yeah, I'll leave
Yeah.
it there.
Well,
I believe there was some language related to it, yes.
yeah, and we've got time to look into that if need be. And to go on to the next question from David Mowbray asks, is this intended to be condominium or rental units? If that is something that could be answered at this point in time.
Yeah, it's intended to be rental.
Thanks, Rhea. And an anonymous attendee asks, do you have already a sense of a start date for building construction and when it'll likely finish? Maybe it might be good to talk about the process from here on out with the site, if anyone would like to broach that, whether from the applicants or the planner or Jeff.
There's a lot of I don't want to say unknowns at this point, but the process is still, there's a lot of work yet to be done. So it's kind of difficult to anticipate construction timelines. So once again, following the result of this application, there would be a site plan control application that would have to go through. That's a fairly or a very detailed engineering and planning process that essentially determines what's going to be built and what's it going to look like and what are the final numbers and statistics. In our experience, a site plan control application takes 10 to 12 months before receiving site plan approval. Although sometimes when they follow up on existing applications like this, that timeline might be reduced a little, but it is a fairly detailed exercise with amended reports that go into more detail with respect to the proposals. So I would assume once this is done, you have a site plan control application for a period of approximately 10 to 12 months. Towards the end of that process, or somewhere around the middle, once the envelope is fairly certain, the architect will initiate the building permit process to run concurrent to that. And it's only once receiving site plan approval and your site plan agreement that you could proceed. So it's tough to say a start date for building construction, and it all depends on receiving the appropriate approvals. But I hope that provides a little bit of an idea of how the timeline works from here on out.
I'll just leave some open space in case anyone else wants to jump in. Jeff, we typically do have pre-construction meetings as a condition in the DARs for this. So that also at the end of, say, a site plan process would help with that. Perhaps if you want to talk about that, or maybe
But, I
said
mean,
whether
yeah,
it's
you said it's a couple of years from now, obviously, before even the earliest time when they can start building. But before it does start going under construction, we generally have a meeting with the most immediate neighbors to talk about construction impacts, and we build that into the site plan. So we get together to talk about where the truck's going to go, what are the hours of construction going to be, what can residents expect by way of vibration. So if this building is approved, you can count sometime after they've pulled their building permit and they've hired their contractor, and their contractor has figured out how they want to construct the building. We'll be able to have a meeting with the community to look at that. But that's a couple of years away at this point.
awesome. And just as we have a few comments and less questions right now, I'll read aloud some of the comments that we're getting. So we have heard from the WBCA and Kathleen Bryden that the OMB decision did enshrine this passage concerning the passage through the site that we were discussing just before. Kathleen Bryden also says as a comment, the existing OP caps this site at 4 to 6 stories, and the decision of the OMB in February 2014 applied to that plan. It directs with strong language that the maximum should be respected. So far, I'm not seeing any other questions. Is there anything someone is seeing in the comments we have so far that we'd like to perhaps address before.
Steph, if I may, if you would like me to respond to comments, I'm happy to. If not, I can limit it to questions. But with respect to the existing official plan and our rationale for it, I would direct anyone interested to read the planning rationale report as presented on DevApps. That provides a fulsome overview of the existing official plan, including the policies of the general urban area that do permit greater building heights in certain key areas. So I won't go through a whole presentation, but I would direct anyone to the planning rationale if they would like to see the policies under the official plan that we believe allow this development to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I think anyone with any insights on the comments, I think anything is welcome to sort of really go into the discussion on this proposal. Moving on to another question from Kathleen, or another comment from Kathleen Bryden that I'll read. And I think someone might have been typing up an answer. It might have been for something else. But they say, for information, this is the language from the February 2014 OMB decision with respect to public passage through the site, which speaks to concerns about the existing glass structure. So in quotes, this is why in the OMB ruling of February 2014, the chair stated that, quote, the space should align approximately with the northward projection of Winston Avenue. The board is mindful of the undertaking by the developer and the city to provide an easement over the plaza, end quote. So this is an excerpt that Kathleen has provided us with from that OMB decision for anyone who might be interested to have that on hand. If anyone would also like to maybe comment on that further, I'll leave the floor open for a moment. Seeing none, I'll go to our next question from Mary Willmont, who asks, are there different, quote, levels of transit stations? Kitchissippi, in parentheses, Dominion Station is different from Westboro, and Westboro is different from Tunney's. Kitchissippi Station is merely a get off, get on type of station with no bus connection being planned and surrounded by residential development. Would TOD apply to Kitchissippi? If it does, it should be at a lower level to conform with the residential nature of the neighborhood and the get off, get on nature of the station. If anyone would like to speak to those questions and concerns.
I can speak to that briefly. There are and there aren't different levels of transit stations. I suppose I would say formally there is the protected major transit station areas that were recently brought on by the province that allow different policy direction for those key stations. In this case, though, neither of the stations qualify as protected major transit station areas, whether Westboro or Kitchissippi. It is important to note, though, through the secondary plan that this location is identified within Sector 5 of the secondary plan, which is sort of the Westboro station area. And then there's a little bit of an extension down what would have been Scott Street to incorporate this site. And that's part of Sector 5. And the policies of the secondary plan generally speak to the fact that they acknowledge that the greater opportunities for intensification and high-rise building heights are going to be located next to Westboro Transit Station. And recent approvals and applications do demonstrate that. We're seeing 30+ story buildings and 25s in that area. So Westboro is definitely a different transit context, but it doesn't mean, sorry. And then I would say the secondary plan specifies that Kitchissippi has more limited potential than Westboro Station. And we think that this proposal reflects that. We're not coming in with a 30-story tower and saying this is very similar to Westboro. We're in the same sector. It's the same area under the secondary plan and so on. We're acknowledging that there's a bit of an ondulation as you go through the various LRT stations. More major stations will have more heights, more neighborhood oriented stations will have lower heights. And we think this 12-story proposal reflects that. So we do recognize that Kitchissippi Station is not Westboro Station, and we're not proposing the kind of heights that are being proposed and approved near Westboro Station. We think 12 stories is entirely appropriate for a transit station such as Kitchissippi.
Thank you, Jacob, for the answer. I don't know if anyone else would like to speak to it. If not, we currently have no other questions in the Q&A, though we are doing good for time if anything else comes in or if anyone thinks of anything. If Jeff, if it's okay, I know we were going to let Tony from the WBCA speak. So Tony, I'm just going to take a second to allow you to sort of talk, and you should have just gotten a prompt in order to do so.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay. Thanks. I appreciate it. And thank you for the presentation. I've been asked to speak for the Westboro Beach Community Association, which is against this proposal for the simple reason that it is too tall for the neighborhood. And it should conform to the plan. We don't believe that, and it's interesting to point out that the plan, both in its old form and its new form, so the clergy principle doesn't matter one way or another, set a height maximum on this specific site for 8 stories. This is 50% taller than that. And the policy rationale contained within the secondary plan is that this is a low-rise neighborhood. It's a very clear statement of how each of the diversity of neighborhoods in Ottawa is clearly laid out in the secondary plan. The secondary plan is the site-specific application of the general planning principles. So in this case, it's important to remember that the specific rule overrides the general. The developer has put forward a lot of very general, broad planning principles, some of which they've gotten from here and there. But I think we have to remember that the official plan, old and new, and thank you for putting that map up there, took all of these into consideration. The provincial policy statements, guidelines, the Planning Act, all of this, the current policy environment was taken into consideration when the height maximum schedule that you see on the screen right now was approved. And it was sort of reapproved. They sprinkled holy water on it, so to speak. It was already something that was in place. Now, you'll see that the center of the screen there, sort of a brownish block, thank you, is the site that we're talking about. It used to be 4 to 6 stories tall. And at the OMB hearing in 2014, it was changed to 8 stories tall. From a community perspective, we considered that to be a compromise already. And so it's sort of like we feel that over the course of a decade of pushing back against the developers' attempts to bypass these height maximums, we just keep clinging to whatever the height maximums were. It used to be 6, now it's 8, and 12 is another 50% higher than that. Now, if you can look on this map here, you'll see directly to the north is all the Westboro Beach Community Association area, and everything in there is under 4 stories, and everything directly to the south and north is directly 4 stories. So you can see how isolated and disconnected the site is from the small buildings all around it. And so we're going to go from 2 and 3 story houses up to 12-story houses is not appropriate. And it's for this reason that the plan has put in the maximum, and we feel that this is a very important principle, that the specific prescriptive limit on this site plan cannot be overturned by the developer's collection of general principles from various documents, unless, of course, we assume that the policy folks at the city planning department didn't do their homework. They did. They've already taken into account the provincial policy statement and other guidelines, directives, et cetera, et cetera. So we can't keep, they know about the transit. The 2014 ruling of the OMB was made after phase 2 of the LRT was approved. There's nothing new about the transit station. It is not a transit hub. It is a single route stop. You cannot make a transfer at Kijisibi Station. It's a short neighborhood of dead-end streets. It's not going to be a transit hub in any sort of the way. So because of this, all of the sort of references to edge conditions, transit intensification, Sector 5 reference, it's a sort of a cherry picking of different ideas, which should not be a legitimate path to overturn the city planning department's specific and careful and deliberative attention to this very site in this specific neighborhood. And I'm not just saying that because it's what we believe, but because that was the approach we took when we took the developer and the city before the OMB in 2011 and 2012 and 2013, and were vindicated in 2014 with the ruling. So quite simply, to close, given the history of this site, we expect that the city planning department will reject this request for an OPA, especially since the height maximum was not considered necessary to change from the old to the new plan. And so based on this consistent height maximum, and taking into consideration the full and detailed policy rationale of this highly overstudied site in the OMB ruling, we hope that the city planning department will not approve a building, and that maybe it would be possible for the developer to come back with an 8-story version of this. That would be wonderful.
Seeing Brian's hand up right now, if you'd like to go ahead as well. And thank you, Tony, for your comments.
Yes,
really
thanks. I would love to respond to that. I don't think it's fair to characterize FOTEN's assessment of the policies as cherry picking, because at the end of the day, there's a Planning Act opportunity at any point in time prescribed to allow for official plan amendments and secondary plan amendments. And fundamental, when a planner looks at that, they have to look at the overarching policy references. So we would look at the official plan, both the old and the new, and we would look at the provincial policy statement to give us guidance on that. And as Jacob pointed out, there's been some pretty significant changes since the OMB hearing in those particular policy areas that are the backbone upon which we rationalize the increased height. And I think to say that the city's newest official plan and the adoption of the secondary plan again into it undertook the type of analysis that's inferred there is wrong. Like, you can look at the entire Scott Street corridor on that map and see that the 4 and 6 policy framework that's shown there hasn't been updated, despite the fact that the city has approved 25 and 30-story buildings. So they simply didn't amend this policy document in any meaningful way, because that was not their initiative. That was not the mandate, if you were. They have indicated in time that they're going to look at the secondary plan. Your counselor and I have been both very clear that that's the appropriate thing to do. And the reason that I feel that way is because the secondary plan was not done. Well, it's outdated now relative to those policy considerations. And at the time that it was done, it wasn't done properly, quite honestly. And so, I think there's a very legitimate reason why we're looking at this amendment. But similar to what my colleagues have said, I think the client has been trying to find a reasonable balance, weighing all those considerations. And we hope that, more people will look at this revised plan, which has taken a lot of effort to really see that there is an effort to try and find, some common ground and a hybrid approach that at the end of the day capitalizes appropriately on the location, because as planners, we should be looking at locations like this with the right design, but balancing that against, the obvious differences that this site exhibits compared to the sites on Scott Street, for example.
Thanks, Brian. I won't delve too deeply into all of that. I do want to say first that the 2014 plan, CDP, is very shaky ground upon which to evaluate this. And speaking very objectively, the applicant does have a right to make an argument that under existing official plan policies and existing provincial policy statements, that they are legitimately asking for a change to the official plan. I don't agree that this is an appropriate location for this height. I have let the developer know that based on undue adverse impact in the nearby community with respect to traffic, because this is not on an arterial road like many of the buildings on Scott Street are, that I'm not able to support it, and I feel that the original OMB decision should be respected. But I don't want to confuse people that my opposition is based on an adherence to the 2014 OMB decision and the 2014 official plan. I think we have to make arguments that are rooted in the current official plan in order to legitimately dispute this proposal. And I'm more than happy to have that discussion with residents. If you want to give me a call or come by one of my pop-ups. So I'll just leave it there. Sorry, I went on longer than I intended. So from here, just in terms of process, we'll wrap it up now. The city planner is on the file, Steve Gauthier, and it is Steve's job to evaluate this proposal in the context of all of the different plans and policies that the city has that guide development in this location specifically and across the city. He is going to write a recommendation to the city's planning committee that they should or should not accept this application. Generally, I think most people will understand that if the city planner on the file is recommending refusal, that generally doesn't move forward to planning committee. It will only move forward to planning committee once it has a recommendation in favor. Developers know that planning committee gives significant deference to its planners. So the next step then will be we have to lobby Steve for the outcome that we're looking for. The developer will be lobbying Steve for the outcome that they're looking for. And then Steve will need to evaluate all the feedback that he's gotten and make a recommendation. At that point, planning committee will vote, and then city council will vote. And then, as residents here know very well, there is a period where it could be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So the most important thing is to put your policy-based arguments in front of Steve Gauthier. I do ask that people copy me on that, and we'll wait to see what he recommends. Steve, did you have anything you needed to add?
Does everybody have my email address? I can put it in the.
Yeah, let's get all those in the chat.
They're in the chat now.
I do want to say while that's going, oh, thank you very much, Steph. Steph, by the way, is my assistant. I think many of you knew Fiona, who worked with me for many years on planning files. She's moved on to the city, and Steph is in the same role now and learning very, very quickly. We did have a small glitch in terms of notification on this meeting, for which I wanted to apologize. While I had it on Facebook and I was able to get it into the newsletter over the weekend, normally I like to give people a couple couple of weeks notice, but I know the community associations were also sending it around. Please do accept my apologies, but also know that the most important opportunity for feedback is between now and planning committee in terms of your messages to Steve. Steve, anything that you wanted to add? Sorry.
No, so I'll be awaiting, I've taken good notes tonight. There will be further discussions with the applicant and developer. We'll be awaiting a resubmission. And as you've explained, I will put forward, once staff is satisfied with the proposal, we'll put forward a recommendation to planning committee. When would this happen? Likely, it depends on the resubmission and on the discussion. So I invite the people following this information session to write me emails, and I will certainly consider them as part of the recommendation.
Oh, apparently you can't copy email addresses out of the chat. So please feel free to write to my office, and we'll make sure you have all the information you need in order to be able to email steve.gauthier@ottawa.ca. And of course, I'm jeff.leeper@ottawa.ca. So with that, I just want to thank FOTEN and Uniform and Barry Hoban's team for being here this evening. And this presentation will be going up online sometime, I'm going to guess, before the end of the week. And when it is online, I'll be sure to put a link in my newsletter. So thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate your time. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.